So let's dive into anatomy and physiology with the study of the human orientation, how we orient the human body. Um, the human body is very complex. It has trillions of cells. They are all doing specialized functions in specialized places with specialized goals for the human body. The whole point is to maintain homeostasis, which is a very narrow range of values to keep us healthy and alive. We will briefly talk about the cell, but just to give you a little heads up, you came from the ocean. You are aquatic animals first. And in order to move to dry land, we had to figure out how to stay aquatic in a waterproof suit. And that's how like skin evolved and everything over trillions of years, of course. So you are ocean organisms on land. Cells started as singular cellular organisms, and now, as I said, we are trillions of cells. So it got very, very complex relatively quickly in the whole scheme of animal evolution. When we get to the human body, we are one of the top of the food chain type of animals. We are currently let's start. We are currently at some sort of peak of evolution. I'm not sure which one. Um, and so we are nearly as complex as it gets. Now, that is a very human view of things, but you know, when we talk about the human body this semester, we're going to go through the orientation. We're going to go through some basic chemistry. You're going to start with cells themselves, the different types of cells that make up the human body, the tissues that make up the human body. We call that histology, which is the study of tissues. And then you're going to get into the integumentary system, the skeletal system, the muscular system, and the nervous system, which is not a small part of the human body in this semester. So, to orient ourselves, anatomy is the structure of the form of something. Why is it formed this way? Why is the liver all filtering tissue and blood vessels? Or no, but yes. And why is the organ, they're all organs, the stomach a hollow organ? Why are they formed to be these things? The reason they're formed to be something, the anatomy of it, has to do with whatever physiology you need it to complete at that time. So the physiology is the function of something. For example, a four-chambered heart is not the most efficient type of heart on this planet. But because of the complexity of mammalian life and large mammalian organisms, we had to come up with a system to get blood to all the cells in the body, and that system ended up being a four-chambered pump. The physiology was, I need to pump blood. The anatomy was, here's a four-chambered heart. So the physiology causes the form. Form follows function. You have a function you need to fulfill first, and then you create something to do that function. You do need to know form follows function. Subdivisions of anatomy are gross, ew, or another way to think of that is what you can see with the naked eye. When you look at somebody, you see mostly their integumentary system, skin, hair, nails. You see their eyeballs, um, their nose, their facial features, whatever. You can see the structure of their body form. And then if you were to, let's say, become morticians, or if you were to become doctors in a morgue, to do studies over the causations of deceased life, you would be able to see the liver, the heart, the lungs with your naked eye. You don't have to do any microscopic work. You have regional anatomy, which is how we break down the outside of the body to try to determine where things are. You have system anatomy, which are the 12 body systems of the human body. And you have surface anatomy, which is your skin, hair, and nails. Then you have microscopic anatomy that deals with structures that are too small to see. We have cytology, the study of cells, and histology, the study of tissues. Then, if you really wanted to get into a type of biology that is extremely interesting but also difficult to learn, you can do developmental anatomy, which studies the anatomical and physiological development throughout life, starting with sperm and egg, and then your zygote, and then your blastula, and then your hollow ball, oh, that's the blastula, and then your embryo, all the way through maturity. To study anatomy, one must know anatomical terminology. And I have a list of anatomical terms posted in your first module under additional information. And if you were in my class, like if we were face to face, you would have multiple quizzes over this list. But now I just need you, ladies and gentlemen, to look at the list and determine what you do and don't know and go from there. You have to be able to observe, that's using your eyes, manipulate. Mani is hands. So to manipulate something is to move it with your hands. To palpate. Palpate is to use your fingers to determine if the structures sound appropriate. And to auscultate, which is to use your ears to hear if the structures sound appropriate, which is what doctors use stethoscopes for. Subdivisions of physiology are based on organ systems. As I stated, you have 12 of them. You know them if you really thought about it: integumentary, cardiovascular, reproductive, which I actually meant to say respiratory, but whatever, all those. Often focuses on cellular and molecular levels of the body. There are levels to organization. There are levels to organisms. You do have to know these levels for your first exam, which is on the next few slides. To study physiology, you must understand basic physical principles, e.g. electric currents, pressure, and movement, as well as basic chemical principles. And the reason for that is biology is the third science that developed on this planet. If you take the history of the planet, the very first laws that govern this planet were all physical laws, physics, the laws of physics, gravity and motion and electricity. And okay, so physics is like my super weak point, so help me out here, but you know what I mean. Then when the earth cooled down and water started to collect on the planet, we started to organize some chemical rules on the planets, acids and bases, salts. We got hot springs, which are all acidic hot waters. You got the salty Dead Sea. You got Salt Lake City, Salt Lake, and all these things. And so we started to organize some chemical rules. And then if you go back to biology 1406, you learned that through sheer force of randomness, electrical currents that were shoved through salty water started to cause combinations of elements that formed molecules. And once molecules started being formed, we started to develop the third science, which is biology. So biology has to follow all the rules of physics and chemistry. We cannot break physical and chemical rules in biology because we were created out of physics and chemistry. I hope that made sense to you. Anatomy and physiology are inseparable. As I told you, you have something that needs to function some way, and so you create the form for that function. This is known as the principle of complementarity of structure and function, which is a very long way to say form follows function. So, talking about that structural organization, I'm sure that you are all familiar with the levels of structural organization all the way through the biosphere, but we're going to stop at organism. So you have atoms. You have, it goes one at a time. You have atoms, and atoms form molecules. I kind of just went through the history of that. Molecules, when they're formed together, which I mean chemistry, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, when you get all those together, you get organelles and cells. If you have a cell, then you also have nucleic acids involved. When you put a whole bunch of the same cell site together, you get tissues. Tissues are the same cell doing the same function. Muscular tissue, cardiac tissue, smooth muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue. Those are all the same. But when you start layering types of tissues, you get organs. And so organs have two or more tissues working together to solve a function. So this is a blood vessel. A blood vessel is lined with smooth squamous epithelial tissue. You want it to be smooth so blood can flow through it. But then you have muscular tissue that helps it expand and contract as your body pulses. And then you have connective tissue to hold it all together. So two or more types of tissues working to solve a function. And then you have an organ system. And here you see the cardiovascular system. Red is arteries, blues is veins, and how the whole thing functions in an organism. So we stop at organism, but past organism is population, community, ecology, something, and then biosphere. So it goes higher than organism. If you were in my class, you would find a partner with the same colored shirt as you, and you would try to answer, what are the functions of life? There are 8 of them. Okay, so necessary life functions involve maintaining boundaries. You have no idea how much the world changed the second a cell membrane was created, which was a rudimentary cell membrane back in the day. It was called a mycele, and it was only one layer of lipids thick. They weren't even phospholipids, but it started to create an outside and an inside. And since that day, we have had to maintain the outside and inside boundaries. Movement, responsiveness, digestion, metabolism, excretion, reproduction, and growth. Okay, so as I said, the maintaining boundaries is the separation between internal and external. And for example, at the cellular level, that plasma membrane separates cells. And at the organism level, skin separates the organism from the environment, which has been very beneficial to us as human beings, I must admit. Movement. As an organism, we have muscular tissue to make us move by pulling on the bones that we have. However, we don't have to be as big as an organism to move. Even single cells can move, and that's called contractility. So movement is any kind of movement. Now, with single-celled organisms, we call it taxis, like chemotaxis or phototaxis, where you can see them purposely move towards or away from light or chemicals, but they're still moving. Responsiveness is the ability to respond to stimuli. So with that chemotaxis, chemo is chemicals, taxis is movement. If they are responding positively towards sugar water, they are responding to external stimuli. Now, at the organism level, human beings respond to external stimuli through our nervous system. We can control it with our wow, too many nervous systems. Oh, my Lanza, what's the one we can control? Anyway, you either can control it, we'll get there, or you can't control it, like breathing rate. You can control your breathing rate, you can force yourself to breathe, but mostly your body is doing it for you. All living life has to digest and breakdown of ingested foodstuffs, followed by absorption of simple molecules into the blood. Plants don't have blood, but plants still digest the carbohydrates that they create through photosynthesis. Human beings and other any animal has to ingest something. Whether they're herbivores or carnivores or omnivores like human beings are, we have to ingest something and digest it. Metabolism. All chemical reactions that occur in the human body is the sum of catabolism, which is breaking down molecules so that you can digest it and get the nutrients, or anabolism, which is building up molecules, like creating your bones and creating your muscles, or if you're bulking up your muscles, building more muscle tissue type thing. Excretion. Waste is toxic. So all living life has to get rid of waste, be it CO2 or food waste or blood waste, because if you don't get rid of it, it's toxic to the body and it will eventually kill you. All living organisms have to reproduce. That is a fundamental law of life, to create offspring of some sort to continue on the genetic pool. That is what evolution is based on. At the cellular level, we reproduce by mitosis, and at the organism level, we reproduce by meiosis and creating those sperm and egg cells to produce offspring. And then growth of some sort. Now, at a single cell level, growth is just the cell cycle, the synthesis 1 and then interphase and then synthesis 2, and then you can go into PMAT. I do hope y'all remember all of that. As human beings, growth involves creating more and more and more cells as you grow from your average 7-pound infant size to whatever height and weight you are now. So we grow. That's fun. So those necessary life functions were, let's see if I can name them. Movement, metabolism, excretion, growth, reproduction. There's 5. Maintaining boundaries, responsiveness, and digestion. So there you are. List the hierarchy of organization from smallest to largest. You need to be able to do that. Oh, aero means oxygenated or air. The medical prefix for bluish is, it's going to be in that list in your supplementals. And a bonus question, 2 medical prefixes that mean to produce. So go ahead and look at that list that I have posted for you. Humans are multicellular, trillions and trillions and trillions of cells, 20 to 40 trillion cells. So to function, individual cells must be kept alive. All of our organ systems, all of them, the design of them, the creation of them is to keep our cells alive. The trillions of cells that make you up, excuse me. And all cells depend on the organ system. So there's 11, I usually say 12, organ systems that work together. And you know what? I'm going to give you the 2 minutes to try to figure out what they are before I tell you. So we're just going to think about what the organ systems are. You're doing great. Oh my goodness. Did you get them all? First is the integumentary system. So skin, hair, and nails. This is our waterproof covering that maintains our internal aquatic environment. It synthesizes vitamin D and houses our cutaneous receptors. You have thermoreceptors, nociceptors, which determine if you have pain or not. You have multiple types of pressure receptors to where you can barely feel if something's touching you, to where if something's crushing you. Sweat, which is sudoriferous glands, and oil, which is sebaceous glands. You have a skeletal system. It's the framework for all of our meats and organs to hang off of. It protects us. Now, our skeletal system is built as if we were four-legged animals with our abdomen protected by the ground, because our abdomen would be facing the ground, but we are upright animals. So we do have a pretty weak spot in our skeletal system of our whole abdominal area being exposed. But besides that, blood cells are formed within bones, and the bones, of course, store minerals, calcium, magnesium, phosphates as well. Skeletal muscles allow manipulation of the environment. Remember, mani means hands, so it allows us to use our hands to there's no other word, manipulate the environment. It allows us to move, and it allows facial expression, maintains posture, and produces heat. When you shiver to get warm, it's your muscles vibrating to produce heat. Then you have the nervous system. Fast acting, we have reflexes that don't involve our brain thinking at all. Then we have, of course, the central nervous system with the brain and spinal cord, and that has many different versions. You have the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, which is then broken down into the flight or fight responses. Flight or fight, yes. And those are even broken down farther. Lots to do with the nervous system. But its whole job is to respond to internal, which is chemical, or external stimuli, and manipulate the body to maintain homeostasis. You have the endocrine system. As human beings, we like to think that we are in charge of everything, especially with our big brains, and that our central nervous system, you've been taught, is what causes our body to do all the things. But I am here to tell you, ladies and gents, that what actually controls you is a whole bunch of teeny tiny chemicals binding to receptors in your body. And all these teeny tiny chemicals are from the endocrine system. So it's hormones and phospholipid. Well, no. So sugar lipids. What are they called? Carpolipids or glycolipids and glycoproteins. Oh my God. That bind to different receptors and cause your body to react in certain ways. So you are not so much in control of yourself. It is your hormones. They do processes such as growth. That is what the thymus and thyroid are for, is growth. Reproduction with the ovaries and testes, and nutrient use, metabolism with the adrenal glands and the pituitary and pineal glands, to name a few. The endocrine system is very vast. Cardiovascular system, the whole point is to transport oxygen to the cells and get carbon dioxide away from the cells. Lymphatic system is tied very closely to the cardiovascular system to move fluids around your bodies and to help mount the immune response. Your respiratory system, you have multiple respiratory systems. You have external respiration, which is ventilation, which is inspiration and expiration. So that's getting air in and out of your lungs. Then you have systemic respiration, which is getting air from your lungs to your cells. And then you have internal respiration, which is getting air from your blood vessels into the cells themselves and collecting carbon dioxide. So it's much more involved than just breathing. Digestive system, everybody's favorite. We are tubes within tubes. We are deuterostomes as animals, which means that in formation of ourselves in utero, inside the woman's body that you were created, you actually formed your anus first, and then your mouth was formed later. So that is what a deuterostome is. But our mouth to anus is just one hollow tube through our body, surrounded by our muscles, And then you can think of the skin as another tube. So we are a tube within a tube in order to break down foodstuffs so that we can get the nutrients from it. Food is energy. You have the urinary system. The urinary system has nothing so much to do with what you eat. What you eat gets defecated. The urinary system is there to remove wastes from your blood and turn it into urea, which goes to the urinary bladder. Regulates water, electrolyte, and acid base balance of blood. And the reproductive systems, male and female, are all about producing gametes and getting those gametes fertilized to create offspring for reproduction. And breasts in a female are solely biological, and they are used to feed the babies after they are born. Okay, those are the organ systems as defined by this PowerPoint. Humans need several factors for survival that must be appropriate as well. These include nutrients. Of course, we have to have oxygen, but fun fact, too much oxygen will kill us. Water. Of course, we need to have water, but fun fact, too much water will kill us. Normal body temperature. That one, there's no fun facts. And appropriate atmospheric pressure, which is a big one that we have no control over. Nutrients. Of course, you have to have your carbohydrates, your proteins, your lipids, and fats. Oh, those are lipids. I'm so sorry. For energy to build, all your proteins are your buildings, and for long-term energy, carbohydrates are short-term energy. And then we need a minute amount of different various minerals and vitamins to fire different things off in our bodies to make them work. Oxygen is essential. Why is oxygen essential? From Biology 1406. Do y'all remember? I'm going to assume that everybody who's listening to this video said, yes, you absolutely remember. It is because at the very end of the electron transport chain in cellular respiration, the very last thing to happen is to put those high energy electrons that we harvested throughout cellular respiration and place them back onto an oxygen to make water. I assume all of you remember that. That's exactly why oxygen is essential to all cellular life. Now, having said that, too little oxygen and you suffocate and die. Too much oxygen and you suffocate and die. What? Oxygen is actually toxic to us. That's always fun for me. And as you breathe in oxygen and it gets utilized in your body, it releases free radicals, which is why antioxidants are so important in your diet. And science thinks that anti-radicals, along with other things like telomeres being cut, are one of the main causes of aging in human beings, all due to the fact that the oxygen that is essential to survive is poisonous to us, toxic to us. That's fun. You can only survive about 3 minutes without oxygen. Water, most abundant chemical in the body. Much like the earth is 70 some odd percent water, you yourselves are 70 some odd percent water, depending on your hydration level and your weight and your body type and all those things. Remember, the reason that we are water and that you are supposed to drink half your weight in ounces and body weight in ounces of water a day is because you are aquatic animals that happen to move to dry land. So every chemical reaction that occurs in our body was developed in water. So every chemical reaction that has to occur in our body still has to happen in water. And so you need to stay hydrated. And also we secrete and excrete all sorts of things. Normal body temperature. Whoa, where did I go? 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Medical science has kind of disproven the 98.6 recently, and said that a normal range for human beings is like 98.2 to 96 or 99 point something, 99.6. So saying that 98.6 is your average body temperature is probably not correct because different people have different averages. But anywho, you can either be hypothermic where you got way too hot and you boiled alive, or you can be hypothermic and you got way too cold and your body stopped being able to produce energy because all the chemical reactions slowed down too much, and you can die either way. Appropriate atmospheric pressure. You may not have ever realized this, but when you breathe, no, not when you breathe, not when you force yourself to breathe, but when you are breathing and you're not thinking about it. Okay, actually both. Your lungs are vacuums. Your lungs aren't doing anything to breathe. They're just hollow vacuums. It's the muscles and the diaphragm surrounding your lungs that cause either negative vacuum space to occur, in which case air moves into your lungs, or it causes positive pressure to occur and air is forced out of your lungs. But your lungs themselves are just a vacuum. We have to follow the laws of physics in order for air to travel down its concentration gradient into a vacuum. You have to have appropriate pressures. So the last major topic in this introduction is homeostasis, which is a relatively stable internal environment. We have very narrow ranges of health in our body. Human beings' blood pH is 7.3 to 7.4. You get a 0.1 range of blood pH, and then you're either in acidosis or alkalosis, and neither of them are good for you. As we commented, you have a bigger range for body temperature, but body temperature still has a very finite range to it. The pH of that's acidosis. That can also be done because of respiration failure. If you have too much carbon dioxide building up in your blood, you can also go into acidosis. And too little. If you have too little carbon dioxide, you have too much oxygen. And that's not alkalosis, that's something else. Anyway, so homeostasis is a dynamic state of equilibrium. It is a seesaw that is never at zero. If your body goes to a state of zero, which is no work being done, then that means that you have died. So you need it to be dynamic. It always needs to be slightly off center, and it's maintained by contributions of organ systems. To maintain homeostasis, you are constantly monitored by the nervous system, the endocrine system, and all your other body systems in a little bit. But those two play a major role. And so you have things like blood sugar. I don't know if y'all have ever experienced sheer hunger, but when you get irrationally angry when you're hungry, it's because your blood sugar has dropped too low. Now, if you are somebody who also suffers from diabetes, that causes more systemic issues than just being hangry. So blood sugar you have to maintain, body temperature you have to maintain, blood volume by drinking fluids you have to maintain, and all these have to do with nervous system receptors and control centers. So a receptor is something that responds to stimuli, and it sends that response to your central nervous system. And it says central nervous system, which is the control center, and it can either be your spinal cord or your brain. Here is some information that you need to know. And the central nervous system or control center says, thank you for this information. Here is what we're going to do about it. And an effector is created. The effector can be a hormone. It can be muscle movement. It can be smooth muscle movement that you have no control over. And the effector either reduces the stimuli, negative feedback, which is how 99.99999% of our body systems work. Almost everything in our body is the negative feedback, which is I have fixed the issue, and once the issue is fixed appropriately, I turn off the signal to fix the issue. There are two, possibly three, but two that I know of, positive feedbacks in our body, and we'll talk about it. But the most common one is the negative feedback, that once the variable changes in the opposite direction of what's wrong, we shut off that original stimulus because we don't need to go overcorrect, right? We don't need to shoot past normal and go back to the opposite side of normal. Examples are regulating body temperature or regulating blood glucose by insulin. So, for example, if you sense an increase in blood glucose, which is hyperglycemia, which can cause, I always get hyper and hypo confused. jitteriness, sweating, types of things. Then your body is going to tell the pancreas, or the pancreas is going to secrete insulin into the body that is being controlled by the nervous system. And that insulin is going to absorb more glucose out of the bloodstream, which decreases blood glucose levels. Now, once again, if you're diabetic, you don't have that pancreas responding like you're supposed to, whether you're type 1 or type 2. And so you need to insert insulin into your body to take over that control center response, which is why people have to monitor their blood glucose so closely if they're diabetic to make sure that they are responding as their nervous system would if they were producing insulin appropriately. So here's that seesaw I was talking about. Now this is making the imbalance seem like it is way extreme. It's really just like, oop, I'm off balance. And then you go, oop, I'm off balance. And you always just play around the center here because you want to always be not at zero. So a stimulus changes a variable, the receptor detects the change, we go to the control center, the input information is along an afferent pathway, this is nervous system, to the control center, and the control center decides to do something about it, and it sends a response out of the efferent pathway, and the response gets us back to the homeostatic level. And once we've done that, we shut off this original stimulus so we don't swing too far the other way. Oops. Oh, so here is temperature. The imbalance is you've gotten too hot. This is hypothermia. So we know that because temperature sensitive cells in the skin and brain say, man, I'm hot. We go and tell the brain, you're too hot. The brain makes you sweat, and evaporation of sweat, because water has such a high specific heat of evaporation, helps your body cool off and the body temperature falls. Otherwise, you are too cold. And your control center says, hey, I'm too cold. And so you begin to shiver those skeletal muscles to increase body temperature. Either way, once you've gotten back to temperature, you shut off sweating or you shut off shivering. You don't keep going. Now, positive feedbacks, the very rare responses that we have are we have a stimulus that we need to increase, that we need to increase, that we need to increase. But then eventually you still need to shut it off. The examples that I have for you are enhancement of labor contractions by oxytocin. So only biologically I'm trying not to offend anybody, sorry. So only if you are biologically female and can get pregnant would you possibly experience this. Or everybody, platelet plug formation and blood clotting, because you don't want to start forming a blood clot and then stop. You want to form a blood clot to form a blood clot to form a blood clot. So you break a blood vessel or you tear one, that is how blood starts to release itself from a blood vessel. We normally do that in very small increments, and we get something that's called a bruise. And a bruise is blood that is collected under the skin that the body eventually clears away. But that's because of a break in a small blood vessel. Or you do a paper cut. We aren't talking about super severe cuts here. Anywho, you break or tear a blood vessel and a positive feedback cycle is initiated. When you do this, all these chemicals are released from that blood vessel wall that cause platelets to come to the site and release more chemicals that cause more platelets to come to release more chemicals, blah, 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 until you finally have formed a full clot and stopped the bleeding. Now, once you have done that, you still do actually need to turn off the stimulus, but you still do positive feedback for a while until it's formed. The reason you have to turn that off is because you don't want your blood clotting when you don't need it to be clotting. That is a very bad thing to happen. And with oxytocin and pregnancy, through all my research of pregnancy, it turns out that it's surfactant of the lungs that trigger oxytocin release. Okay, so surfactant on the baby's lungs, because the lungs are the last organ system to develop fully, because they should, in theory, be the last thing the baby needs. Surfactant is what is used to make sure your lungs don't rub together, and everything is smooth in the cavities because you are constantly causing friction in there. Anywho, surfactant, when it is fully created, causes a signal in the mother to release oxytocin in the brain to start contractions. But you don't want to start contractions and then stop before you're ready. That would be a negative feedback loop and you won't result in birth. So you have to start contractions to increase contractions to increase contractions to increase contractions until the cervix is completely open and the baby can be pushed out, at which point your body does a huge flood of oxytocin so that you bond to that baby, but then it shuts it off. And other hormones, progesterone and something else, take over so that you stop um, contracting the uterus because the baby's out and you don't need to anymore. Disturbances of homeostasis is increased risk of disease, of course. It contributes to changes associated with aging. Basically, aging is all your body systems become less effective at what they're supposed to do. If negative feedback mechanisms become overwhelmed, destructive positive feedback mechanisms may take over, such as heart failure. Woo! Lecture 1 done. Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. We'll do the chemistry of life next.